We are now, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and good morning and welcome to this meeting of Boston Borough Council's Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Tom Ashton and I'm the chairman of this committee, and my vice chairman is Councillor Austin. As with all virtual meetings, so that the public know who is in attendance, we will now take a roll call of attendees. Jeanette, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If committee members could just answer that they are present. Councillor Alison Austin.
Present.
Councillor Peter Bedford.
Present.
Councillor David Brown hasn't arrived as yet, Chairman. Councillor Paul Goodale.
Present.
Councillor Neil Hasty is expected but hasn't arrived as yet, Chairman. Councillor Jonathan Noble.
Present.
Councillor Frank Pickett.
Present.
Councillor Paul Skinner.
Present.
Councillor Yvonne Stevens.
Present.
Councillor Chelsea Trafford.
Present.
Councillor Peter Watson.
Present.
Councillor Judith Wellborn.
Present.
And also the officers in attendance. The Assistant Director for Planning, Mike Gildersleeves.
Present.
The Legal Advisor, Martha Reith.
Present.
Planning Officer Grant Fixter.
Present.
And myself, Chairman, Jeanette Collier, Clerk for the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And also joining us this morning are members of the public who have registered to speak to the committee in accordance with the public speaking protocol approved by full council on the 1st of March. They will be present during the public speaking time and a period afterwards to allow them to answer any questions members may wish to ask them. The clerk will then move them back into the waiting room, at which point they can leave the meeting and view the rest of the meeting on YouTube. I will introduce the public speakers when we come to deal with the applications. And that's just a heads up for those people that are going to be in the public speaking to prime up YouTube if they want to follow the rest of our proceedings. That's the place to do it. I'd also add that given that we do things, given that we are a public meeting, I really do prefer all members of the committee to keep their cameras on, as we are, as I say, a public meeting, and the public would expect to see us as if they were attending our meeting in person. However, I understand some people may have connectivity issues and would fully understand if you cannot sustain a good connection with your camera on. I'm perfectly happy for you to turn it off. But the legislation for these meetings being virtual is that we should be seen if possible and heard at all times, or have audio connection at all times. And so thank you very much for that. We'll now move into part one of the agenda, and that is to receive apologies for absence and notices of substitution. Jeanette.
Thank you, Chairman. There are apologies from Councillor Brian Rush, and I received notice that Councillor Neil Hasty would attend as his substitute, but he hasn't arrived as yet, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. And item 2 is to sign the minutes of the last meeting held 15th of December 2020. And I would just point out that the time that the meeting closed will be amended. It ended at 10:55 and not 7:25. And I would just add that if at any point we are ever still going at 7:25, I will have failed completely as your chairman. If any member wishes to query the accuracy of the minutes, please use the raise hand facility to speak. Assuming not, and assuming that you're happy for me to sign those electronically or in some form when we're able to do so, we will take that as agreed. I'm just checking on the no one's got your, none of you have got your hands up. Item 3 is to receive any declarations of interest in respect of any item on the agenda. And before we do individual declarations, Jeanette would give the standing declaration.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to point out that Councillor Neil Hastie has now been able to join us. I confirm that standing declarations of interest will be recorded within the minutes for this meeting for all members of this committee who are also members of Lincolnshire County Council, the South East Lincolnshire Joint Strategic Planning Committee, and representatives for the Council on the internal drainage boards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And do any members have declarations that they wish to declare in respect of items on the agenda? Councillor Wellborn, please.
I'm speaking on the first item, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And if, of course, anyone has anything that they haven't spotted that arises during the meeting, please raise your declaration then and we will record it appropriately. I will now move on to item 4. Any written questions from members of the public?
There are none, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the preliminaries, and we will move on to part 2 of the agenda and receive the planning applications. The first application today is B 200338, which is on page 5 of our agenda, and I'll invite Mr. Gildersleeve to present the report, please.
Sorry, Chairman. I should have said at this point I'll bring the speakers, the public speakers, through so that they can hear the whole presentation.
Thank you very much.
If you just give me a moment. It's Mr. Weaver and Mr. Foreman are now joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Weaver, and welcome, Mr. Foreman.
Thank you, Councillor.
Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just bear with me 1 second and I will set up the screen sharing. So hopefully you can all see that. If someone could just give me the nod. Yeah, great stuff. So the first application before you members is for the siting of 4 glamping pods with associated highways access car parking wash block at land adjacent to Oldcote, Scrain End, North Freeston. Just for locational purposes, the star on the Google Earth image is the approximate location of the site relative to Freeston Village at the point of the cursor here and Butterwick Village at the point of the cursor here, Freeston Shore being here. This is the location plan, so you can see the extent of the application site outlined in red, and that is the area within which the glamping pods would be located. You can see that the adjacent property, Oldcote, is outlined in blue. That is land within the control of the applicant, as members will well know, and members will note there are residential properties on either side. This is a block plan showing the proposed development. So we have an access arrangement at the point of the cursor here with requisite highways visibility splays, entering into a gravel parking area for 4 vehicles. There would be a bin store at the point of the cursor here. The 4 glamping pods would be arranged in an arc around a central feature here, and there will be a shower stroke toilet block at the point of the cursor here. Boundaries to the site being retained as existing. These are some examples of the glamping pods that are proposed. As set out in your report, they are relatively small structures, single story being about 5 metres long and 2.5 metres or so wide. They are relatively standard structures, and a similar example of a wash block that has been provided by the applicant. Since the publication of the report, there have been a number of additional submissions, so I do draw members' attention to them. We had 2 photographs provided by the agent of bird and bee nesting facilities that were circulated to all members. Then we've had a total of 5 letters of support including one from the We Will Meet Again Museum. Those generally raise issues regarding boosting visitor numbers, adding to the range of accommodation within the area, and that the proposals would be acceptable in the surroundings. And we've had 4 further letters of objection from nearby residents. The majority of the matters are covered in the report already, but 2 additional issues have been raised in terms of the impact of additional people in the area, i.e. walking, etc., the impact that may have on the free flow of traffic, but also in terms of privacy. Looking at the site, this is looking at the host property Oldcote, point of the cursor here, with its main sort of divided off amenity area identified by the point of the cursor. The area in question for the glamping pods does form part of the wider garden for that host property. Moving round, looking at the eastern boundary, you can see there established vegetation, well maintained, and established trees. Obviously, these photos are taken in winter time. And then this is looking across to the adjacent property, which is Rose Cottage, and you can see the boundary fence that is located between the two. In the images, you can just see the property in question. And again, looking towards the western boundary, the front boundary of the site, and you can see the existing access here for the host property, which is just to the west. Looking along the highway in both directions, you can see there is clear visibility with the visibility displays running across the highway verge. And then these are taken from the rear of the site. Looking back, you can see the rather distinctive fence that I identified earlier. So the application site is just the other side of this fence. You can see the host property Oldcote in the back of those photos. So the main issues are, as outlined in the report, they are the principle of development and impacts upon residential amenity. In terms of the principle of development, the first question is whether or not the proposal is necessary for this location. It is accepted that the site is within proximity of the We Will Meet Again World War II Museum, the RSP Nature Reserve at Freeston Shore, and therefore there is a close relationship, but there is that question there of whether the proposals are necessary in relation to those facilities. And officers do not consider that substantive evidence has been provided to demonstrate that there is a need for these and a necessity for these within a countryside location. If I show you this image shows that, again, for locational purposes, the extent of the application site here, and the proximity of the We Will Meet Again Museum here, the RSPB Freeston Shore. The Sea Bank is part of the Public Rights of Way network, which continues around here, and there are public rights of way down to that site. Then you have got Freeston here to the north, and within Freeston itself, there are 2 public houses. There is a shop, there is a butcher's, but they are some considerable distance from the application site down an unlit single track road, typical countryside characteristics. So the second part of policy 1 is about whether or not the proposal is sustainable in terms of meeting the economic, community or environmental benefits. It is acknowledged that, as set out in the report, there would be some economic benefits and there would be some community benefits arising from this tourism proposal in this location. However, there are some concerns regarding environmental issues, particularly regarding the impact around the impact upon neighbouring properties and residential amenity. Moving on from policy 1, policy 9 specifically deals with tourism accommodation. That does look to support small scale proposals for the visitor economy within the countryside, provided they do not conflict with neighbouring uses, provided they are in keeping with the character of the locality, and that they can demonstrate a functional link with an existing rural attraction or farm enterprise. Officers' view on this is that in one sense, the proposal can demonstrate a functional link. There are those rural attractions nearby, but there are issues in terms of the conflict with neighbouring land uses. And to that end, the proposal does fail one element of that particular policy. So when we look at the principle of development as a whole, officers consider that the proposals don't comply with part of policy 1. They also don't comply with parts of policy 9. And therefore officers do consider that the principle in this case is not acceptable. Moving on to the more substantive point, which is around the impact upon residential amenity. As I highlighted earlier on, that you have the host property here, and you have neighbouring property here and here as the 2 most immediate residential properties, but also there is another residential property at the point of the cursor here. The proposals are relatively small in scale. However, there is a question mark around the intensity of the use and the use itself in that location. In terms of breaking that particular point down, in terms of looking at pedestrian and vehicular traffic, yes, it is accepted that given the scale of the proposals, it's likely there's the traffic impacts are likely to be light. It would be infrequent traffic with people coming and going at different times. You would have a bit of synergy with check-in, check-out times. However, there is the ability for that to be spread, and it would be somewhat seasonal. So actually, in terms of the impacts arising from traffic that would be generated with this proposal, officers do not consider that that would be unduly harmful to the amenities of local residents when comparing that to how a residential property could be used. The scale and design of the pods themselves in terms of the physical development are considered to be an appropriate design, appropriate size and height, and given the established boundaries wouldn't result in any direct overlooking or overshadowing. So in terms of the physical impact of the pods themselves, there are no concerns. The issue ultimately for members is whether or not the proposals as a whole in terms of the use of the land would result in a detrimental impact on residential amenity, and officers believe it would. And that is supported by the comments of our environmental health officer, who have raised concerns about the sort of general use, the noise and disturbance, particularly where people want to sit outside in summer months or when the weather is better. It would be more intense than the residential use of a garden. And we are in a relatively quiet, isolated countryside location, background noise levels being quite low. So it is considered that the levels would be greater than what would be expected from a typical residential garden. And it is considered that there would be a direct impact, predominantly on Rose Cottage, which is this property here, which is the immediate neighbour. So officers believe that as a result of the proposals, there would be a detrimental impact on residential amenity, and therefore the proposal would be contrary to policies 2, 3, 9 and 30. Members, you'll see the report is set out in detail before you. I've highlighted the representations that are set out on pages 10 and 11. You'll note the objection from Freeston Parish Council on page 12, and you will note the formal basis for the 2 reasons for refusal, which are set out on pages 22 and 23 of your report. I don't wish to go any further on that, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gildersleeve. Before we move on to members having any queries or questions, we have registered speakers which we will invite to address the committee. We have 3 speakers registered. Mr. Philip Weaver, an objector who lives next door to the application, the applicant's agent, Mr. Guy Foreman, and the ward member, Councillor Judith Wellborn. You each have up to 5 minutes in which to speak, and the clerk will make you aware when you have 20 minutes remaining in order to complete your speech, and will then advise you when your 5 minutes is up. Mr. Weaver, can you please address the committee?
I've just requested that he unmute. If you could wait a moment. We can't hear you. Oh,
can you hear me now?
yes.
Yeah.
I won't start your time until you start speaking, Mr. Weaver.
Okay. Thank you for the rundown by the last gentleman. I can't remember your name, I'm afraid. But yeah, I understand obviously that 4 more local people have made objections that you mentioned. So that out of the 16 houses, I believe that almost every single house within the local vicinity have made objections. Basically, a lot of the reasons that people object is obviously the noise and things that have been covered already. The wildlife situation it is a big concern as well. That there's owls, there's bats, there's lots of birds, there's newts, etc. in the vicinity. They stop in the trees, and the cutting down of a lot of the trees that they're proposing would, I believe, be very detriment to the wildlife in the area. Obviously, you've covered the noise, antisocial behaviour perhaps might be an issue. A few of the residents were concerned about mental health, that obviously they moved to the area to be in a quiet rural location, and then to suddenly have more people walking around, possibly looking through windows, making noise, would affect them, and they feel like they might have to keep the curtains closed, so people can't look into the houses and things. Another concern was litter, the fact that the people might go for walks around the local countryside, obviously, and go onto fields and places where they shouldn't be. There's a sort of thing with the farmers that local people know where they can walk, where they can't walk, but obviously visitors won't know where they can and can't walk. The location is obviously a big issue as well. The fact that it's proposed to be in basically, it's a large garden in a residential area. And obviously most of the residents, all the residents don't feel it's suitable for area for it. Just trying to think of all my other things. Obviously, there's a lot of points that the owners of the property, they can't guarantee, obviously, that there won't be litter, there won't be noise, there won't be lots of cars, etc., etc. Let me just see. Sorry, I'm not very organised. But basically, it's not suitable for the area. Being so close to the houses and a quiet rural location. Basically, pulling upon some of the comments the last gentleman made about the location. That's it. Thank you. I think I've said everything I need to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Foreman, can you please address the committee? You're muted, Mr. Foreman.
Sorry. Good morning, councillors. Yeah.
Good morning. I'll start your speaking time as soon as you start speaking, Mr. Foreman.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, councillors. Firstly, I would like to confirm that this scheme was submitted for paid pre-application advice to the council in May last year. Advice received from the planning officer in June was positive and comprehensive. Notably, the planning officer provided positive comments in relation to the scheme satisfying the requirements of policy 1 and 9 of SELP, with the officer stating in relation to policy 1, given the site's close relationship with nearby visitors and attractions, it may be argued that the proposal is necessary in such a location, and also, given the scale and type of the development proposed, that it would also deliver economical, community or environmental benefits. Accordingly, this plan application was submitted 5 months ago. However, under the plan officer report for this committee, reason 1 put forward for refusal is that the scheme is contrary to the objectives of policy 1 of SELP. The applicant and ourselves strongly agree with the planning officer's first opinion provided in the pre-application advice and are somewhat perplexed by this change in stance. Whilst there has been several neighbour objections to the scheme, we do feel the comments made by neighbours are disproportionate to the scheme submitted. If one were to read the comments without looking and understanding the scheme, one may think the scheme was a commercial-sized holiday park such as Butlins. It is not. It is a carefully considered, environmentally friendly, micro-scale glamping site for just 4 pods, to be run by a local couple who are generally passionate about the local wildlife and countryside they themselves have worked and lived within for the past 41 years, with Mr. Drury himself having worked on the same farm just 3 miles away for the past 41 years. Whilst emotions can run high when neighbours are seeing change to their local surroundings, this is where any local plan comes to the fore in guiding decision-making for planning applications. We firmly agree with the planning officer's pre-app advice in that the proposal complies with policies 1 and 9 of SELP. In respect of concerns raised on the private amenity to the neighbouring dwelling, Rose Cottage, we note that actually the council's environmental health team, both at pre-application advice stage and at consultee stage, raised no objections, which you can see the notes online, to the proposal in relation to the loss of private amenity to the neighbouring dwelling. This was based on there being adequate screening retained between the application site and the neighbouring garden. Photos circulated before this meeting will show the 6-foot fence already erected by Mr. and Mrs. Drury and the trees already in existence on the site. Further to this, the applicant themselves will reside in the dwelling located on the site and so will be on hand to police the site. Not that it is expected there will be disturbance from the type of people this proposal is aimed at. The council's environmental health team's comments further acknowledge this. It is worth noting at this stage that Mr. and Mrs. Drury could, and were in fact considering, a certified location site for 5 touring caravans in the grounds of Oldcote. As councillors may be aware, a CL site for up to 5 touring caravans does not require planning permission. However, Mr. and Mrs. Drury personally felt this wasn't the right thing to do for the area or the setting. They wished to go down the route of smaller, fewer timber glamping pods that accommodate a maximum of 2 adults and 1 infant, and which are aimed at bird watchers and walkers who wish to enjoy the special immediate setting that is Freeston Shore. In doing this, they wish to make the grounds of Oldcote a special micro setting for the glamping pods and increase habitat and biodiversity. Photos circulated to councillors before this meeting show Mr. and Mrs. Drury have already built beehives from which honey has already been harvested and have erected bird boxes at Oldcote. Concerns raised on flood risk and highways at pre-application stage have all been satisfied, with the respective agencies raising no objection to the proposal. The nearby We'll Meet Again World War II Museum have provided supportive comments and acknowledged the need for accommodation such as that put forward under this proposal. As well as increasing biodiversity, Mr. and Mrs. Drury wish to make the site as environmentally friendly as possible and intend to install an electric car charging point. In summary, this proposal complies with the relevant policies of SELP. The proposal is no worse than what Mr. and Mrs. Drury could do on the site in respect of a CL site for 5 touring caravans, which does not require planning permission.
You have
This
20
proposal-
seconds remaining, Mr. Foreman. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. This proposal is for the right type of accommodation in the right setting, which will enable people to enjoy the special wildlife and countryside that is Freeston Shore, a great asset for the Borough of Boston. I thank councillors for their time in listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foreman. Councillor Wellborn, it is now your turn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm supporting this application by Mr. and Mrs. Drury, as I think 2 pods would be beneficial to the area, as proposed before. They are small in nature, 2 by 5 metres by 6 metres. They will be constructed by a local firm, all arrive on site constructed to go onto a raised base of brick rubble and gravel. They will contain 2 beds and a small kitchen area. The shower blocks, 1 female, 1 male, will be of similar construction and contain a shower, toilet and hand basin. The drainage will be connected to the supply of the property. The pods will have electric and water supply. The site is enclosed on 3 sides by a 6-foot fence and a 6-foot hedge along the front. As both Mr. and Mrs. Drury will be working, late night noise will be discouraged. It is also a dog-free site. There will only be 2 visitor cars and Mr. and Mrs. Drury is on site. Obviously, Mr. and Mrs. Drury have an extensive family, so if they visit, it will incur more noise, as would be expected. There's a holiday let in the vicinity, which is always busy, especially with the RSPB and the We'll Meet Again Museum in the area. Both are happy with the application. The site has beehives which produce honey and fruit trees. There are also bird, owl and bat boxes. The objection from the occupant of Rose Cottage, who has since moved, was about the noise considering the property is 20 metres from the pods. I think this is unfounded. I have stated late night noise will be kept to a minimum. During the day, the visitors will be exploring the area. If you look at the page 21 and point 7.49, you'll see how this passionate Mr. and Mrs. Drury are about the area and the project. In summing up, Mr. and Mrs. Drury have done everything they can to preserve the ecology of the site, which is important to Mr. Drury being an agricultural worker. They have done everything they can to address the objections, and I feel it would be an asset to the area. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wellborn. Do members have any questions for our speakers? And I see Councillor Yvonne Stevens, you've got your hand up.
Chairman, I've got one question for Mr. Weaver. It disturbs me because he said he's not organised. And being as I'm involved with litter, I don't want to find a litter hotspot at Freeston Shore. Although I do feel inclined to be supportive of this. I actually like it because it's going to bring economic development.
Stevens, this is question.
Sorry, I'm going too far. It was just really my concern about. I think if Mr. Weaver could assure me that the litter problems wouldn't be a problem, litter wouldn't be a problem, I would be very much in favour of this proposal. Thank you, Chairman.
Stevens, are you sure that question is for Mr. Weaver and not Mr. Foreman? Mr. Foreman is the applicant's agent.
Well, it was for Mr. Weaver, but I've probably done it out of sync, so I do apologise, Chairman, if I've done it incorrectly.
Okay, I will invite both Mr. Weaver and Mr. Foreman. If you have an answer to that question, please, Mr. Weaver first, then Mr. Foreman. You're muted, Mr. Weaver.
Sorry, you have to press it every time. Yeah, obviously, at the moment we don't have an issue with litter really, but my concern is that we may have an issue with litter with more frequent visitors in the area. So that's my stance on that, really.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Foreman.
Thank you. I think what I would say is obviously this is a contained site with the people that are going to run it living right next to the site. The type of people this is aimed at is for people that come to enjoy the countryside, that are walkers, enjoyed wildlife. You know, we're not, you know, it's not going to be a Butlins. This is very much people that want to be with nature. They are not the sort of people to litter, obviously. And, you know, having said that, the applicant is still there on site to monitor that. So, and on the basis there's already walkers to, you know, Freeston Shore RSPB reserve, and if, you know, if there's no issues about litter already, I very much doubt there will be, you know, concerns going forwards in that respect. But like I say, the applicant, Mr. and Mrs. Drury, are on there living on site to monitor and police that anyway.
Thank you very much. I mean, I would just add at that point that there is no control on the number of visitors able to visit the countryside. There isn't any, and I think it would be unfair to expect controls, you know, to expect things that are not in the gift of applicants on this site. Councillor Peter Watson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to ask a couple of specific questions, and I'm not sure whether Mike Gildersleeves or the applicant can help me here. My questions are seasonal. Is this going to be a seasonal site, or is it going to be, under planning rules, a all-year site? Also, I would like to ask Mike Gildersleeves, is the applicant correct regarding 5 touring caravans? Because my concern here is that, not that I have anything against caravans, whether that is a legitimate option, that it would be allowed without planning permission. And lastly, on the litter front, would the site have litter bins, and would the litter bins, and obviously there would be refuse from people staying in these pods. So what arrangements would be if this was approved? Thank you.
If I may respond then, Mr. Chairman, through yourself.
Yes, sorry, thank you.
So, Councillor Watson, in terms of seasonality, you will see at 7.44 of the report that if we were in a position where we were minded to grant planning permission for this, we would have to impose a seasonal condition. That is to address the matter of flood risk. So, whilst the applicants may wish to extend beyond that period, clearly they would want to maximise their business, certainly I would if it was me, they would be regulated by the virtue of that condition. In terms of the matter of the touring caravans, yes, you can quite legitimately put touring caravans within the curtilage of a dwelling on garden land, provided it is compliant with the requirements under permitted development and also compliance with the Caravans and Control of Development Act 1960, which also includes being a member of the Caravan and Camping Club. Now, the extent to which members give that weight within their determination is a matter for them. The matter of a fallback is a material planning consideration, but the weight to be attributed to it is up to you. That is not the proposal that we have before us. We have an application that is for specific planning consent, and therefore that is what we are determining that is before us. But as I say, the weight you want to give to that, you can or you know, is up to you. All I can say to you is that at this moment in time, there isn't a Caravan and Camping Club operation on the site. So if that was actually the case, then clearly I'd be saying to you that is a significant material consideration, and you're giving weight to the balance of impact versus what's there already versus what's going to be there as a result of this proposal. In terms of litter bins, members, I think we're getting a bit hung up on something that is relatively small fry in the context of the application before us. Litter on site could be appropriately controlled by the applicant. Litter within the wider countryside, in terms of where it comes from, who drops it, where it gets blown from in the wind, etc. It's very difficult to police. So we can't judge what people will or not do. But in terms of litter bins, that would be something that if we were minded to approve this, you could put a condition on if you felt it absolutely necessary. But the recommendation before you is one of refusal.
Thank you. And Councillor Watson, there were elements of your questions for the applicant, and I cannot just remember what they are. So if you'd like to pick those up. I would also say if members have questions for Mr. Gildersleeve, we can pick that up after the members of the public and speakers have answered their questions. Thank you.
I suppose, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is regarding what arrangements would the applicant be making for, would it be like a commercial waste contract would be put in place for the refuse on the site? Because I have seen some campsites where if a campsite is set up and it's not done properly, the local litter bins in the residential area are then, I suppose, filled by campers' waste, so to speak. So that was my question there. Thank you. And also I might add, in response to Mr. Gildersleeve's, there is obviously nothing stopping the applicant from tomorrow, next week, whenever, deciding that they will join the Caravan and Camping Club, as it were, and put a site up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I've just took some notes from, thank you, the councillor's queries. So yeah, first to say we have shown a bin storage area on our site plan, and that these would be, the applicant would pay commercially for a refuse and recycling bin to be taken away. It's just a note as well that obviously under this proposal, there's a lot less of an impact than a CL site, because, for example, there are restrictions on this to flood risk, which limits the site to operations. I think it has to be shut from November to March because of flood risk. But actually, under a CL site, they could operate all year round. and that is, just to emphasise, that is very much a real fallback for the applicant, but they wanted to do the right thing for the site by doing these clamping pods, which are more eco-friendly and for the area. Yeah, I think that was all the points. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wellborn and Mr Weaver, I see you're indicating, but I'm afraid this section is for specific answers to questions that members of the committee put to you, so I can't bring you back in to have another speech unless someone asks you specifically a question. I do have one very quick question for Mr Foreman. Is there, as part of this application, is there any intention to take away any trees that are currently on site?
No, there's not any intention to take away any of the trees. There is probably some very small trees that are probably a year or two old on the roadside that may need to come out. I think they're more shrubs, to be honest, because it's a while since I've visited the site, because it's taken a while, sorry, during the planning process. But the none of the mature trees are to be removed.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else indicating. Mr Weaver, I cannot bring you back in because these are... Councillor Austin, are you waving at me?
Yes, Chairman, I don't seem to have the facility to put my hand up for some reason. Councillor Skinner did have his hand up, but he subsequently taken it down. And I was going to also ask about trees to, Mr Weaver said that trees are already being taken down. So I don't know whether he could substantiate that, or whether I think Mr Foreman has probably clarified the matter, but I just would be interested to know what inspired Mr Weaver to ask that question, please. I mean, to make that comment, please.
Thank you, Mr Weaver.
I'm on mute. No, I'm off mute. Thank you. Yeah, it's a comment that I wanted to actually bring up anyway. That's why I put my hand up. Yeah, basically the people that put forward the application, they firstly haven't lived in the house a night yet, so they don't actually know the area. I don't know how they can be passionate about the area if they haven't even stayed in it. And they have been
your answers to what has happened, not
they have cut down some trees already, and there is trees at the front of the property and a well-established hedge. Now the trees aren't a year or two old, because the gentleman that's now passed away, John, who used to live there, he planted all those trees in that garden. He bought the land as a field, and it's got an agricultural clause on it. I believe it's the one where you have to have worked on the land, which obviously the jury's cover anyway. But yeah, there are quite a few trees at the front of the property to make the driveway, which will have to still come down, even though that the applicants have already cut down some of the trees already, which is a big shame, and I just hate trees being cut down.
Thank you very much for that, Mr Weaver. I'm conscious that in our constitution we are only supposed to have 10 minutes for this section, and at the same time I appreciate that this is our first time doing this, asking questions of speakers, so it will take a little while for us to bed down into a rhythm. But I'm keen to press on. I don't see anyone else indicating that they'd like to ask questions, so I'll thank Councillor Wellborn, Mr Weaver and Mr Foreman for your contribution to our meeting this morning, and Jeanette will put you in the waiting room. Councillor Wellborn, obviously you'll be very welcome back in the meeting if you're a substantive member of the committee, just as soon as we get to the next item. Mr Weaver and Mr Foreman, if you'd like to follow the rest of our proceedings, then we are live on YouTube, and I'd encourage you to do that.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I just confirm that the applicant has taken down trees in their back garden, not on the application site?
Thank you. Thank you
So
very much.
for that one. And the other ones are able to be moved, spade dug and relocated because they're that small. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll now remove the speakers to the waiting room. Thank you, Chairman. They're in the waiting room.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I was just going to clarify for members, and I will just jump back to PowerPoint, was just there would be an element where the hedgerow and trees that are on the boundary would have to be removed at the point of the cursor here. However, that hedge is not an ancient hedgerow. None of the trees are protected. Somebody could quite happily do that as part of their own management of their garden, etc. And creation of an access at that point would not require planning permission. So in terms of the level of impact upon trees, that is not something that forms a substantive part of the recommendation before you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gildersleeve. That's much appreciated. And it's interesting to see on the plan that you've just shown the layout of the pods and the trees and how they seem to fit together. I'll open it up to debate and invite speakers from the committee. Who would like to kick off? Councillor Bedford, please. And
that better?
thank you.
Thank you. Well, knowing the site and the area as I do and have done, my memory obviously of Scrain End goes back to when there was a post office, a pub, a school and a chapel. And of course, all of that is long gone. Scrain End is not a registered envelope. It hasn't got a village. It is in the local plan for no development whatsoever. There are many reasons in my mind why this should not happen. If you look at your map on page 7 of the agenda report and look where the red dot is for the site, and then just come slightly south and turn left to where it says Shackleton's Rest. That is known locally as Crazy Lane, which goes through and back onto Shore Road. At the moment, and 9 months of the year, that lane is totally impassable. There's about a foot of water down there, all the way through it, massive potholes and craters. And so the nearest route to We'll Meet Again and to Freeston Shore is not usable. Not even with a 4x4, you would not go down there. Or if you did, you may have some expensive wheels to replace. The whole thing is they haven't proved the need in my mind. And the Freeston Parish Council, and I'm sure Councillor Skinner will support me on this, we haven't had that many people to a Freeston Parish Council meeting in all my time. The fact of objecting, virtually the whole of the settlement came. And that is, well, quite an undertaking to get people to actually come out in objections to this. There may be a need for this type of thing in Freeston Shore area, but certainly not in this location. The moment, if anybody has been to look at the site and so on, and have gone past the plumbers, there is actually a pod or an old gypsy caravan, whatever you want to call them, appeared on their lawn, which looks as though there may be that type of thought there, which of course would be far, far better. Also, the fact of the North Sea camp is within half a mile, as the crow flies, of this site. And that really does give me reasons for concern, the fact who may use it for other means. Residents do not have the right to appeal. Applicants do. And also, as far as the touring caravans, my understanding of CC sites, they have to pass a very, very strict examination by the CC themselves, and they have to have the shower facility and toilet facility. So I would go along with the officer recommendation, and I will move refusal, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bedford. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Going back even further than what Peter was suggesting, indeed, the plumbers, as you mentioned, and the marine in the 1900s were the seaside accommodation, but things have moved on from there. And I do believe around there's documentary evidence for around 1918 that Scrane End was actually a Royal Air Corps training fields, but we don't have many aircraft land there these days, thank goodness. Really got mixed ones with this. I know Lincolnshire are trying to have more year-round opportunities for people to stay. I will concur with what Peter says. The unclassified road is not very good down there. It is an unclassified road and therefore has got low importance. Unfortunately, the farmer, I believe, has filled a dike with a pipe that is of unsuitable size. So that is why that floods. But that's a separate issue. I'm actually, despite being a keen camper, I'm actually quite comfortable with the recommendations presented. So I think I'll be supporting as the paper. Thank you.
Are you seconding Councillor Bedford, Councillor Skinner?
Yes, I think I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Councillor Noble, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think the two key issues here are, as alluded to by Mr. Gildersleeve, it's the principle of development and its residential amenity. But first, just recurring to what the agent, Mr. Foreman, said about the threat of a CL caravan site. To quote Shania Twain, that don't impress me much. In fact, it doesn't impress me at all, and it's completely counterproductive from his own point of view. Like, we're dealing with the issue before us, which is these glamping pods. So let's talk about those first of all. I don't think they're particularly attractive. They look to me like glorified wooden sheds or sort of a slightly heightened igloo. I know it's a matter of aesthetics, as in the eye of the beholder, but I don't think they're particularly attractive. But let's look at more technical matters for a start. One is drainage, actually, because Councillor Wellborn said the drainage is going to be connected to the existing property. But if you look on page 16 of your document, it says foul drainage from the glamping pods will be collected in underground pipes connected to a package treatment unit. No details have been submitted which shows the location of the proposed package treatment unit, nor the underground pipes. So there's a lack of technical detail. I also think that the 4 parking spaces is inadequate for this, because the people who are staying there may well have friends come and visit them in the day. I can see that noise could considerably be a problem, especially in the summer months. People will sit outside, they'll be drinking their alcohol, voices will be raised. So it's going to have a detrimental effect on the amenity of the local residents, the people, especially the people who, I think it's in Rose Cottage, which is close by. It's completely out of character with the area, I think. So that's a very strong reason for objecting to it. So just in terms of policies, oh, sorry, just recurring again to the pods. I forgot to say, yes, they're going to be, according to the documentation, nearly a foot above ground level. So it's going to make them even more visually intrusive. There's no ecological survey being done. I agree with what Councillor Bedford says about the roads. These are sort of roads that are extremely narrow. They are liable to flood, and just going to cause more problems, I think. So just referring to particular policies, I object to it on the grounds of policy 3, design development. I think the designs are inappropriate, and I think it's going to have a detrimental effect on residential amenity. That's 3.11. And then when we go to policy 2, development management, impact on neighbouring land users by reason of noise, visual intrusion, disturbance. I think that's an also valid objection. So I wholeheartedly oppose this development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. We won't ask you to sing the song you refer to. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. Please don't ask me to sing it either. I can't go with what my fellow councillors have agreed or what I've put forward, or the recommendations, because if it's the best of two evils, the camping pods or caravans, I would much prefer camping pods. So I won't be agreeing with them, so I'm going to vote against this. And if I get an opportunity, Chairman, I would like to put forward that we vote the opposite way.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens. This is a really interesting application, and for my part, I am incredibly sympathetic to its aims and its objectives, and I do personally put quite a lot of weight on the fact that this could be developed as a small touring caravan site. Fair enough, I accept what Councillor Bedford has said, that they have to meet quite stringent inspections, but those inspections are carried out by caravan clubs, they're not planning authorities. And they are still permitted, and they would still cause more traffic movements, caravan movements, and the physical use of the site for people would still be able to sit outside their caravans and talk into the evening. And I think it comes down to a subjective view of what fits into a local area. And for my humble opinion, the glamping pods are less, they don't stand out anywhere near as much as what caravans would. But at the same time, we are encouraging people to visit and enjoy the Lincolnshire countryside, to support our rural visitor attractions where they are, and to support pubs when they reopen in our rural villages. And appreciating that these glamping pods come with a small kitchen, it feels to me that people coming on that kind of holiday are much more likely to go and patronise local pubs and restaurants with their custom in the evening, and help keep the settlements that we have sustainable. So I'm very much with Councillor Stevens on this. If there was a proposal to support the application that's stacked up in policy, then it would probably have my support. But I have Councillor Goodale, then Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pretty much of the same opinion as yourself. I hear what Councillor Bedford has said, and I haven't been down this area for a short while, but well, not since lockdown started, to be fair. But I actually think this sort of development is something which would be beneficial for our whole area. This is a small scale development, and although I accept there will be a small amount of disturbance, I think that is acceptable in my view. The glamping pods themselves are only small scale and limited limited accommodation, if you like, to basically, as it says, a couple and a small child. So it's not as if we're going to have large families in the evening making a considerable amount of noise. I've been on many holidays such as this, not glamping, but in France, rural France, in Gîtes and the like, down and in areas very similar to this one. So I actually think that we as an area need to consider the tourism agenda. I appreciate when the SELT was created that we didn't really have the tourism thing as rural tourism as a priority, but I do think it's something which we generally do need to look at. So I have sympathies with what both Councillor Bedford and Councillor Skinner, what they have said, but on the whole, I feel that I am supportive of this type of development, and I think that the objections can be overcome by conditions. Mr. Gildersleeve has basically put the conditions into the report. If we choose to permit, so I think there are plenty of considerations in there for the neighbouring properties and the residents, and I don't actually feel that the disruption will be that great personally, because of the OSPB site and the museum, who we hope will continue to bring more visitors to our area, to use the facilities which we have in and around, and I think that we will see more applications of this type. So I will be supporting this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goodale. I'll just bring Mr. Gildersleeve in. I see you've got your hand up. Then Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to try and come in after Peter, actually, but that's fine. What I was just going to say was, obviously, members have heard now a few people suggesting they're favourable towards the development, which is absolutely fine. You're not beholden to our recommendation. But just two things I just flag with the committee. One, if that support does move to a proposal, and a second, we do need to be very clear on what our reasons are. And secondly, I would say to committee members to give thought to any specific conditions that you may wish to want to be considered to be imposed, things like management plans, biodiversity enhancements, things like that, because again, we would need to capture any specific conditions. But if we were looking at a proposal and a proposal was favourable and successful, we would be looking at a delegated authority to impose conditions as necessary, so that we don't issue a completely blanket permission. But I just leave those thoughts with the committee, and if you need further advice, I'm happy to give it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am torn either way on this, I'm afraid. I feel that pods, and I do know a little bit about camping because I've done it myself, and quite significantly, quite a few years I've been camping on and off. And I have to say, while taste isn't everything, there are pods and there are pods, and maybe these ones don't look the most attractive pods that I've ever seen. I feel underneath this, the location is the problem. If this property was located not close to other neighbours, I don't think we would be having such a long discussion about this, because I think we have to be mindful of the neighbourhood and people who live nearby. Tourism is a wonderful thing. It brings people from outside the area who spend money in local hubs, restaurants, etc., and that is a wonderful thing. I do actually, I'm turning towards, if it was on a smaller scale, possibly that might work. But as Councillor Goodale quite rightly said, surely we could come up with some conditions that would ensure that noise issue. And I can see this in summertime. People are outside, and as Councillor Noble quite right said, yes, indulge with alcohol, etc. And unfortunately, as humans, our voice level, our volumes tend to increase with more alcohol. So I'm very open to, if this was on a smaller scale, I'd be inclined to accept it. But with the neighbourhood issues, I'm inclined to, unfortunately, agree with the recommendation to refuse planning. And I do feel for the applicants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. I'm Councillor Austin. The reason you can't put your hand up is you're a co-host. So sorry, I just saw you waving.
So I gathered, that's why. So I have to resort to the old-fashioned method. Sorry. Right. I think the other person waiting was already someone who's spoken once, so this is perhaps the moment for me to come in. Obviously, this is a very, very finely balanced application, I think, and we are weighing up, obviously, the fact that it is not it's outside the settlement. However, and I'm well aware of what Crazy Lane is like, and possibly if you try that once, you wouldn't try it again. You would take the slightly longer route back, and your alternative is you might choose to walk it. Now, I'm concerned because we were campers all our lives until perhaps more recent years have made us think otherwise. But you cannot, in the same way as you can't say, oh, you can't assume a certain type of resident is going to live in any housing development. You cannot typify the type of, you can't say a certain type of person is going to be a camper and that they are going to be noisy, they are going to drink, etc. We cannot do that. We cannot discriminate against people just because we think they might have practices that we don't think are appropriate. So I really feel that has to be disregarded. And there's one member suggested the scale. Well, if four pods isn't small scale, I'm wondering what is. Because I mean, I can't think that 1 or 2 pods really would be viable. So I appreciate that being 4 pods is acceptable to me as small scale. Is there need? Well, not everyone wishes to go to a larger caravan site. Not everyone wishes to be in bed and breakfast or stay in the town. I think we have to cater, we have to be prepared to diversify, but diversify within the context of this site. Now, I'm aware that we need a management plan. We need things like rubbish, the full details of all the management, including very, very detailed requirements regarding drainage. But these are matters which, in my mind, can be conditioned, and any application is not permitted to take, to become alive until it's satisfied all the conditions. So as I said, I feel it is very, very finely balanced. But I mean, how close must a neighbour be for it to be, infringing upon their privacy? I don't think this possibly would be any more than somebody who chose to have parties in what is actually part of their garden. At some stage, I would like Mr. Gildersleeves to clarify this matter of an agricultural holding, because 749 clear on page 21 clearly says there is no agricultural holding associated with this property now. So I think we better just have that one clarified. And I obviously don't know this the applicant, but if he worked for 40 years with John Saul Limited at nearby Leverton, I think he's pretty well aware of what this area is all about. I feel inclined to support this application, not to refuse it, but obviously subject to the appropriate conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gildersleeve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The agricultural tenancy tie condition, however you want to describe it, is a bit of a misnomer really within the context of this application. You will see from the planning history that the bungalow was permitted in 1967 with an agricultural condition attached at that time. Again, I would presume because of the location of the site. But ultimately, that is not the matter that's before us. Whether or not they satisfy the condition now in the future, that is not the matter that's before us now. That's a matter for the owners. And we haven't got a lawful development certificate on the table, etc. Albeit there are comments within the report that cover off that point. I would advise the committee that it's not something to get hung up on for this application that's before us. If I may, however, just in terms of picking up on some of the suggested conditions that Councillor Austin has mentioned, yes, those are matters that are quite reasonable to impose on this type of application. Members will be aware of the reasons why we impose conditions and the application of 6 tests. But the fundamental question is, would the imposition of conditions make otherwise unacceptable development acceptable? So if members are minded that with the imposition of those conditions, it would turn the recommendation from one that is before you as refusal to an approval, that quite clearly can form part of your thinking and part of your justification for going contrary to the officer recommendation. But the matters that are raised in themselves are reasonable. And as I said earlier, I would just request delegated authority to define any final wording if that is where we end up with this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just going back to, I thought Councillor Austin focused on what was a very minor point about the behaviour of the people who may or may not on this. That's not the substantive point. The substantive point, which perhaps I didn't emphasise in my initial speech, was that it's to do with the character and appearance of the area. In my opinion, these pods are completely out of character with the appearance of the area. And I also take acknowledgement of the fact that, according to Mr. Weaver, 16 local households also object to this scheme because they allege or assert that it's going to be very detrimental to their residential amenity. So I think there are compelling policy reasons for objecting to the application, and they're principally focused on policy 2 and policy 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve.
Thank you, Chair. I just feel I should respond to Councillor Noble's point in terms of the impact on the character and appearance of the area. That is clearly set out in the report in pages 18 and 19. I would issue a word of caution if we are looking at the impact of the character of the area from the physical impact of the pods themselves. The site is very well screened from the immediate public vantage points. So I think as defending a reason for refusal based on the impact of the pods themselves upon the character and appearance of the area, i.e. the design of them is unacceptable, I think would be very, very tricky for us to substantiate that. However, the use of the land and the use that we're talking about could, if you felt necessary, form part of one of the existing 2 reasons for refusal. However, officers are not presenting the impact on the character and appearance of the area as the main reason for refusal. So just to clarify, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Before I bring Councillor Bedford back in, I'm going to try and be helpful to the committee by getting off of the fence which I perched on a little while ago, and say that, to my mind, the principal policies for the objection is 1 and 9 of the SELP. And certainly in respect to policy 9, and the 3 points listed there of whether it conflicts with neighbouring land uses, whether it's in keeping with the character of the area, and whether it can demonstrate a functional link with an existing rural attraction. I think they can be taken subjectively, and to my mind, I'm comfortable that the link can be made in the context of the wider local visitor economy, the nature tourism, wildlife tourism, the nature reserves at Freeston Shore, and everything else that's going on there. And I would be prepared to go as far, if it would give members of the committee something to hang a hat on, to move approval based on that interpretation and that application of that policy. But I would also, picking up on the neighbourhood amenity, be interested in looking at conditions around screening and around tree planting, with a view to reduce noise or any noise travelling from the campsite. Because at the moment, I appreciate there's a fence, but that fence is quite thin. It's certainly not an acoustic fence or anything complicated. To whether a scheme of planting could help address some of those concerns. I mean, I'd take advice from Mr. Gildersleeve, but I would move approval based on the benefit that this application would provide for the local visitor economy, and how it ties in with all of that. But I will go now to Councillor Bedford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, all I will say to anybody that are thinking of voting of this, if you lived in Rosie's cottage and these glamping pods are going to be, or 2 of them will be, about 6 foot from your boundary, how would you feel? Because personally, I would not be happy. And that really is a loss of residential amenity. And you can put what planting you like just there, but that close to that boundary, I'm sorry, it will not stop any noise. And that's the final point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bedford. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. Being as you've moved approval with conditions, I'd like to second that, please, if I might. Because in my opinion, I would rather see for the area 4 camping pods than caravans coming willy-nilly down the roadways, and probably be much more of an eyesore than 4 pleasantly placed camping pods. So I will second it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevens. I would just add very finally, I think there is a broader area of discussion here on policy and what is permitted, given that there are classes of use which are, or there are uses, potential uses which are permitted development already, which come very close to the similar aims and objectives of this application. And I think that's a wider discussion, not necessarily for this meeting, as to where we see that land. I'll go to my Mr. Gildersleeve, and then we've got Jeanette is waving at me because I will be advised on which order we take this in. So, Mr.
Yes.
Gildersleeve.
Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously we've got a proposal and a seconder for this now in terms of subject to conditions. So I just wanted to clarify what I've picked up as conditions and make sure you are happy as proposer and seconder with those.
Can I just interrupt that this is a direct negative, so shouldn't be debated at the moment. We have a proposal to refuse planning permission, and that's been seconded in accordance with the planning officer's recommendations. So that will be dealt with first, and then if it falls, this second proposal will come back on the table, and you could discuss the conditions then.
Sorry, Jeanette.
Splendid, in which case we will take the vote on refusal first, and if that vote, if we vote to refuse, then it is straightforward refused. If we vote not to refuse, then we will then look at conditions and whether those conditions mean that we can vote to approve. So I'll hand over to Jeanette to ask us whether we are for or against refusal.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if you could indicate whether you are for, against, or wish to abstain for the proposal to refuse planning permission in accordance with the recommendations of the planning officer set out in the report. Yourself, Chairman.
Against.
Alison Austin.
Against.
Peter Bedford.
For.
Paul Goodale.
Against.
Neil Hasty.
For.
Councillor Noble.
For.
Councillor Pickett.
For.
Councillor Skinner.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
Against.
Councillor Trafford.
For.
Councillor Watson.
Against.
Thank you, Chairman. That's 6 votes for refusal and 5 votes against. So that proposal has gone through and refusal is carried, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. So that is refused. We don't need to discuss any further on any potential condition because that's refused. Thank you very much. That's been a fantastic and enlightening and interesting debate, and I'm sure we'll have more of those as we go on. I would just suggest to members of the committee, would you like a 5-minute break before we go? Okay, we will, it's 11:22, we will reconvene at 11:30. I will, if you'd like to turn your cameras off while you disappear, remember we are still live on YouTube.
Thank you, Chairman. I will return Councillor Wellborn to the meeting. Hello, Councillor Wellborn. We're still live on YouTube, having a 5-minute break.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Austin and Mr. Thomas, I've brought back into the room. Hello, Mr. Thomas.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes, we're live on YouTube still. Up into the waiting room, though. As soon as the meeting's reconvened, we'll be going on to the second application. So
That's fine. I was listening. It's past, wasn't it? That you hope to restart again.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much.
That's why I turned your camera off and muted you, just because I didn't know that you'd know that you were in the meeting rather than in the waiting room.
Yeah, no, sorry, I just nipped off for myself, and I've been watching that first application, so
right.
I saw there's a couple of breaks, so yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
appreciate that.
Yeah. Chairman, I've brought the speaker, Mr. Thomas, through, and Councillor Richard Austin. I've brought them through.
Welcome, Mr. Thomas.
Hello.
Sorry, I don't know whether you can hear me. I'll say welcome, Mr. Thomas, and also welcome to Councillor Richard Austin.
Good morning. I'm just trying to start my video, but it says the host has stopped video.
Oh, right. Maybe I have to request that you start it again.
Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Austin.
Could we have about another 2 or 3 minutes? I've just had a minor accident and I just need to get myself back.
Yes, of course.
What?
Of course.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Stop video.
We will give it until 11:35 before we start. To give Councillor Austin a chance to rejoin.
I'm back, Chairman.
Welcome back, Councillor Austin. Can I just check that all members are present? Do we need to take another roll call, Jeanette, having had a break?
Oh, I think they're all back. Well, they're coming back. I have requested that Councillor Skinner and Councillor Pickett turn their videos back on, and then we'll know. But I can take a roll call, Chairman, if you wish.
Thank you. If I can see everyone, we don't need to. Councillor Skinner, are you there? Splendid. I can see all councillors on my screen, so I'm happy that that we don't need to take a roll call, which is the beauty of doing this on Zoom. If ever anyone suggests we ever move on to Teams, I would suggest very strongly otherwise. Thank you very much. We move on to item 2, the second planning application today, which is B20-0432 on page 25 of the agenda, and I'll invite Mr. Gildersleeve to present this report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just move to screen sharing. So once again, hopefully you can all see that. So the application before us is for the erection of a freestanding drive-through restaurant facility with associated parking, landscaping, etc. It is on land to the south of Swineshead Road and east of Wortley's Lane, and the applicants are joint, and they are McDonald's Restaurants Limited and Carter Real Estate. This is the application site as identified by the location plan outlined in red. Swineshead Road at the point of the cursor, the existing roundabout which goes on to serve Tesco's and B&Q and Lidl. And then on the western side we have Wortley's Lane here with some existing residential properties. Some photos from differing vantage points. Members will no doubt be appreciative of the context of the site, but just running round. So this is looking in a westerly direction towards the application site at the point of the cursor, the fourth arm of the roundabout coming off on this side. Top right is looking directly across at the wider parcel of land within that site, and again the area where the fourth arm of the roundabout would be. The lower two photos are taken from Wortley's Lane. Looking across the site, you can see it is a flat agricultural field at present. And then looking at the corner where there are presence of scrub vegetation, etc., which is what you can see as we return around the corner. Once again, those photos are taken in the winter time, again when the vegetation is a bit more sparse. So the application before us is set out on page 28 of the proposal. It comprises
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Councillor Judith Wellborn cannot see the screen, what you're sharing, Mr. Gildersleeves. I'll just see if I can rectify that problem, if you just bear with me.
Yeah, that's fine, Jeanette.
Thank you.
I do apologise, Chairman, but Councillor Wellborn's problem has now been rectified. I'm so sorry, Mr. Gildersleeves. Would you be able to restart your presentation?
Yep, no problem.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Trial number 2. Councillor Wellborn, I presume you could hear everything that was said last time, so I will just quickly run over the slides. So that is the extent of the application site. Swineshead Road at the point of the cursor here, Wortley's Lane at the point of the cursor here. The photographs that I showed in terms of the view looking westwards towards Wortley's Lane along Swineshead Road, the fourth arm of the roundabout would come in at the point of the cursor here. Looking directly across the roundabout where the fourth arm would be, and you can see the wider site in the background. And the lower 2 images taken from Wortley's Lane, showing the site as an open agricultural field at present in the bottom left. And then you can see the corner with the scrub vegetation that I referred to. So the application is set out on page 28. It is for a stand-alone restaurant with drive-through facility located at the point of the cursor here. It is a single-storey building, approximately 402 square metres in area. It would provide a total of 136 seats and would be 5.835 metres at its highest point. Access to the site would be via a new junction, which would be the fourth arm of the roundabout here. Leading in, there would be a right turn lane into the site, the junction for the McDonald's itself at the point of the cursor. The access to the car park coming down here, which then feeds into the drive-through lane, which commences here. The drive-through lane coming round and splitting and returning back around the building before exiting at the point of the cursor here. The main entrance to the building would be here, and there would also be side entrances at the point here, with a patio area which would also encompass some play equipment. 48 parking spaces throughout the site, and in terms of the green space that is located around the site, identified by the green dotted area. Again, showing that in more detail, showing those landscape arrangements, including post and rail fencing and hedging at the point of the cursor to run along this boundary here. You can see there are also various crossing points within the car park itself, identified by the cursor, and there would also be a pedestrian access from a new footway at the point of the cursor here that would enter the site here and cross at this point. The building itself is a standard design of building. It is one of McDonald's more recent models, but it is single story, 5.83 metres to its highest point, comprised of a grey engineering brick and a mixture of timber effect and stone effect cladding. And just a couple of images just showing in CGI format what that building would look like. Obviously, this is with all the signage, etc. on it. Some other key information. So as I say, it is one of the newer store models. There are 136 seats, 48 parking spaces, as I've said, children's play area included. The scheme does include the necessary highway works, including a 10-metre wide access road and the fourth arm of the roundabout, and there would be a dedicated right turn lane into the site. And the proposal would create 65 plus full and part-time jobs, and it is proposed that the basis for the application is that this scheme would meet an unmet demand within the local area and address the overtrading of the existing Queen Street store. In terms of delivery time, the overall project has an anticipated timescale of 14 weeks for delivery of the physical works on site and completion. That doesn't include any of the 278 highway works. So the main issues are set out in your report. Before we move on to those, I'd just like to point out that there have been relatively few third-party representations as set out on page 30 of the report, and the consultation responses from various statutory and non-statutory consultees are set out on pages 31, 32, 33 and 34. Moving into the main issues, I don't intend to go into every single one of these in great detail. You've got a lengthy report before you, which clearly sets out the basis of the recommendation, but I will just pick out the key ones for you. So in terms of principle, members will see from the report that the starting presumption is that this site, identified by the point of the cursor here, is located in countryside, being outside of the settlement boundary, i.e. the red line that I'm identifying by the cursor here, within the South East Lincolnshire local plan. Therefore, there does need to be a justification to say why it is necessary within that location. However, as members will see from the section on principle, from paragraph 7.2 to 7.8 of the report, looking at simply the line on the plan is one factor. It is not the sole determinant of whether or not a proposal is in countryside. And we had, members will be aware, the recent appeal decision just up the road at Cherry Tree Lodge, where that particular matter was brought out by the inspector. And we have to look at this in a more common sense, pragmatic, generalised approach, however you want to describe it. You know, we are all aware that there is commercial activity to the north with existing retail and commercial. We've got 2 existing public houses on the corner at the Cambridge corner with a Starbucks under construction here. We've got existing residential at the point of the cursor here and also on Wortley's Lane. We've got new residential that's gone in here with the affordable housing scheme delivered by Platform. And then we've got 2 housing allocations. We've got the one here on the Mastonbrook site, and then we've got the wider extent of quadrant 2, which is allocated in the plan. So when you take all those factors together, clearly this site doesn't read as being within countryside. It is in an edge of urban location. It is heavily developed around it, and therefore it is not traditional countryside in the sense of the word. So taking that all collectively together, officers do consider that the principle of development in this location would be acceptable, that a commercial use on this site wouldn't undermine the fundamental characteristics of sustainable development. It wouldn't undermine the town centre, and that there are the economic benefits which come into play, and that would weigh heavily within the planning balance. So on the principal point, yes, it's outside of the settlement boundary, but we are taking a more balanced viewpoint, looking at all of the relevant factors. So that is all set out within those paragraphs that I've mentioned. In terms of the character and appearance of the area, yes, the introduction of this as a land use and as a new building, it would result in change. The site is currently an undeveloped agricultural site, but it is commensurate with the size and scale of other commercial uses in the area. It's not going to be overly prominent within the immediate landscape, and it would sit comfortably alongside those uses. The issue of link trips, etc., has been flagged by the agent within their submission. It is considered to be an appropriate size and scale for the site, and taking the wider matters of things like lighting and landscaping, those have also been put forward in detail as part of the submission. So, taking all of those factors together, we are comfortable that the proposals would be acceptable in terms of the character and appearance of the area. In terms of amenity, obviously, given the nature of the use, noise, odour, light, all likely to be significant issues, but they've all been addressed through a range of technical information that's come in with the application. You'll note that environmental health officers raised no objections to the proposal. In particular, they're comfortable that the site could operate on an unrestricted basis, and that the odour matters are appropriately dealt with. Furthermore, in terms of outlook and privacy, yes, the development in this area would impact on the outlook from some of these properties, but given the separation distances, it is not considered to be unduly detrimental to the impact to the amenities of those properties. Furthermore, with the boundary planting that is proposed, that would also help to soften the development and ensure it would have an acceptable level of relationship with those existing uses. I should have pointed out, this is the site where there are some affordable properties which have also been built. So this map is a little bit out of date and there are properties in this area now. In terms of heritage, a very minor point really, there is a milepost located on the opposite side of the Wortley's Lane junction. It is listed and therefore we have to give it due consideration. We accept that the setting would be affected as a result of the change that would take place on the land identified by the cursor. However, that impact would only be minor given the significance of the asset, and it would be at the lower end of less than substantial harm. Therefore, it can be outweighed by other material considerations. And in terms of archaeology, there has been an initial analysis of the site undertaken. There is potential for remains, but the advice we've received on a technical basis is that it can be appropriately dealt with by way of conditions as recommended. Probably one of the biggest points is going to be the highways matters. So just setting the context for that. As you've heard me say a couple of times, the proposal does include, for the fourth arm of the roundabout, footways, crossing points, etc. Members will be aware there is a footpath, as you can see at the point of the cursor in these photos already, which does run around the edge of that roundabout. There would be a right turn lane into the site with space for 5 vehicles to queue within that right turn lane. The on-site arrangement has been designed to be responsive to the size of the store and the anticipated demand. And that has taken into account vehicle queuing and the number of parking spaces. And we have a detailed transport assessment which seeks to evidence the agent's position. In particular, I draw members' attention to this, which shows that highway layout in more detail. And I'm acutely aware of the concerns that we've had in terms of the Queen Street store, in terms of the impact on the retail offer and the queuing, etc., that frequently occurs. So just running through that. So a driver would enter from the fourth arm of the roundabout here. Space within this right turn lane for 5 queuing vehicles. You would then turn right into the site. Anywhere from the entrance to the site here, there is the ability to queue. The formal queuing takes place at the point of the cursor here, and members can see there are 19 vehicles identified that can reasonably queue within that area. There are also a further 3 vehicles here, which takes us up to the 22. The applicant's agent has also identified that there is potential for further vehicles to queue on this section of the entrance road without disrupting the car park. And that would enable at least another, a total of 26 vehicles to be accommodated without having a detrimental impact on the car park. So all in all, officers consider that that arrangement has acceptably covered off the matter of queuing and the free flow of vehicles within the site. You will see there are detailed comments from LCC. We've put in various quotes throughout the report within the relevant section, moving forward from page 43 of the report. But LCC neither object or support the application as highway authority. Officers have considered both sets of both the technical information provided by LCC, but also the applicants, and consider that the details highways design would be subject to the section 278 highway process. The scheme has been designed to take into account the likely store usage and potential queuing. The proposed arrangements would be safe, and that there would be sufficient parking, and that the store would ultimately be sufficiently connected to nearby uses. It would be accessible by people walking across from Tesco's, etc., albeit the crossing facilities, etc., are restricted. But we have discussed that matter at length with Highways prior to reaching committee today. So taking that all together, from a technical highways perspective, the recommendation from your officers is that there's no credible evidence to support a refusal on highways grounds. Moving on to the distributor road. Now, members will see from the comments from LCC that they very much played this back to us as the local planning authority to make a decision as to whether or not the proposals would impact on the distributor road. And I refer to these 2 drawings first. The black stars indicate the approximate location of the site in question. So the first one is taken from the policies maps within the SELP. The orange band that I'm referring to here is the safeguarding corridor that is referred to in relation to policy 34. So clearly the site does fall within that safeguarding corridor identified there. Therefore, it is material for us to consider whether or not the bringing forward of this development would prejudice the delivery of the distributor road at some point in future. But that safeguarding corridor just simply says a route may go through there, and that's what we must consider. It doesn't say that what the route is definitively etc. Moving on, when the evidence base for the local plan was developed, this map was presented as part of the appendices. This was a bit more of a technical exercise to identify where the distributed road could go. The blue line here being the extent of phase 2, which would run through the quadrant 2 allocation. So again, it's just showing how that might run through and then connect into London Road, which is slightly off screen. The orange routes then show where that route could go. So the first one being down West End Road, across the Chain Bridge roundabout and connecting in. Equally, it could continue along Swineshead Road, past the junction that we're talking about here, to another junction before connecting to go northwards across the new Hammond Beck and then across the South 40 foot. There is also another route here. By virtue of these two images, which show where the location of the route goes, it is not considered that this site would prejudice the delivery of a route to come through that area. Clearly, it was not demarked at that point in time. Taking that a step further, and please excuse the location of the star, it has shifted a little bit. But again, the strategic business case talked about a route that comes round here, connecting into London Road. This is the area where we talked about Q2, connecting round and then going out. So the strategic business case, which was developed off the back of some work in 2008, and then taken forward in 2018, again to underpin the plan, talked about a route going much further to the west. So where does that leave us? Ultimately, the question before members is, would this development impact on the future route of the distributor road? And the simple fact is we don't know. There's no evidence to say it would, and there's no evidence to say it wouldn't. But what we can say is that the distributor road phase 3 isn't to come forward until the back end of the plan, some 15 years in advance of where we are now. It's subject to a lot more technical work, planning permission, land ownership, etc., that all needs to be worked out, and the route is not yet defined. But what we can say is that this entrance to the site at the point of the cursor here has been designed in a way that's very similar to the quadrant. So that is a 10-metre wide road. It has footways on either side. It would be designed to an adoptable standard. Therefore, in future, if the route were to come through at this point, there is the potential for that junction to accommodate any additional traffic and to be widened, extended, altered, etc. at that point in time if deemed necessary. So taking all of those factors together, you will see at page 49 at 7.64, officers have clearly set out the reasons why we believe that this development can come forward and would not impact on the future delivery of the Boston Distributor Road, and therefore in terms of policies 33 and 34 of the local plan would be acceptable. So I will not hang on any longer on that particular point. Again, that's just to summarise all of those points that I've just said, which is that principally that the route is not yet defined. So again, we come back to that. We have no credible evidence that would back up a refusal of the application on these grounds. In terms of wider issues, these are all covered towards the latter part of your report. Members will see that flood risk is acceptable subject to conditions, as is drainage. Biodiversity, there would be a net gain and a gain subject to conditions. Contamination is a low risk site, but we've got a condition in case any contamination is found. The air quality impacts have been considered and are found to be acceptable, and we have got no objections from the Council's environmental health officers. Finally, there are some other matters which are set out at page 51 of the report. The question about whether or not this would result in antisocial behaviour has been appropriately addressed. There would be CCTV at the site. In terms of whether the development would be more appropriate at the quadrant, that is not a consideration before us at this time. You know, the justification is for this site, and this is the site that we are considering. The big one I think that members will be interested in will be littering. And clearly, as we said with the previous item, there is an element to what is within the control of planning, what is within the planning remit, and what is within wider social responsibility, etc. And ultimately, the point is made at 7.75 of the report. There would be a litter policy for the store, and ultimately, you know, if there were issues, it would be the council, other landowners, etc., working with McDonald's, you know, in future if a problem does become apparent, to address any of those concerns. But from a planning perspective, we believe we've taken the matter as far as we can in terms of litter. And in terms of healthy eating, again, that matter is covered off. This isn't in an area where we've got a proliferation of similar uses. It's not near schools or any of those sensitive uses. So therefore, again, we consider that there is no policy basis to support the concerns with regards to the lack of encouragement for healthy eating. So overall, the planning balance is set out at section 8 of your report on pages 52 and 53. And overall, we consider that there are economic considerations which are significant and which would outweigh any minor conflicts or minor negatives that may be found to be arising from the development. Overall, we consider that this is a sustainable form of development, and the recommendation before members is one of conditional permission. Thank you, Chairman. I'll end it there, and happy to take any questions after the speakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gildersleeve, for an incredibly comprehensive report. We will now invite the registered speakers to address the committee. And the two speakers we have is Mr. Paul Thomas, Senior Acquisition Surveyor for the applicant, and also the ward member, Councillor Richard Austin. You each have up to 5 minutes in which to speak, and the clerk will make you aware when you have 20 seconds remaining in order to complete your speech, and will then advise you when your 5 minutes is up. So if I could go first to Mr. Thomas, if you would please address the committee.
Thank you. You can all hear me, I hope.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Thomas, and I'm a Senior Acquisition Surveyor for McDonald's. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address you today to support the application. I want to use this opportunity to add some detail to the report before you and to tell you about McDonald's. We've worked closely, as you've seen, with officers throughout the application process and are pleased with the recommendation to approve the proposal. Given the current national situation, the proposed economic stimulus this proposal cannot be downplayed when normality finally returns. In 2019, on the 45th anniversary of McDonald's in the UK, we commissioned an economic report to understand our national contribution. Across the east of England, McDonald's contributed £341 million to the economy and supported 15,983 jobs. We want to take this opportunity to reiterate our commitment to invest in the local area for the long term, creating a minimum of 65 further jobs locally. Our employees are really important to us. As a company, McDonald's invests over £43 million a year in staff training. All of our employees have access to a range of qualifications to help them develop, including nationally recognised foundation degrees and apprenticeships. The majority of our managers started serving in our restaurant, as did many of our most senior staff. The restaurant will be locally franchised, which will inherently provide additional benefits to the local area. I would urge you to speak with the franchisee locally to understand ways in which they can help further within the local neighbourhood, as it is important to the business to ensure we are part of the local community. A community point of which we are proud is our efforts in helping local communities to tackle waste. We've invested heavily in recent years, introducing recycling bins across all of our restaurants, displaying clear instructions as to how to responsibly dispose of and recycle waste. Last year, we launched a new litter campaign called Get in the Bin. It encourages customers to take personal responsibility for disposing of their litter and keeping their communities clean. In addition, all of our restaurants, including the Queen Street Boston store, undertake daily litter patrols at least 3 times a day. In fact, it's estimated that people across the UK walk almost 5,000 miles a week completing litter patrols and organising larger cleanup events, collecting other rubbish as well as their own. Locally, the existing Boston store is actively engaged with the community. And prior to COVID-19, the restaurant was involved in events such as the Big Boston Cleanup. Going forward, the franchisee and restaurant will want to engage further in local initiatives to work closely with groups to assist in organised events. This can be discussed with the franchisee once open. As I said, we have worked hard with officers and the Highway Department throughout the course of the application to ensure the proposal before you is in an acceptable form. The development scheme design has been carefully considered such that it would not prejudice the safeguarded corridor identified in the local plan for the Boston Distributor Road. Historically, this site has been considered as a route for the BDR and dismissed for engineering viability reasons. However, the design and specification of the development would mean that the access road is capable of incorporating into the BDR should, in the future, the Highways Authority change the outcome of the previous site review. As such, the development does not prejudice the future plans for the town. Our transportation experts have also undertaken extensive work to ensure that the layout design is acceptable in terms of parking provision and the drive-through queuing capacity. The transport assessment has been provided to demonstrate that the proposed traffic can be accommodated on the road network without any significant impacts. This has been agreed by Lincolnshire County Council, the Highway Authority. There are many benefits that the proposed scheme will bring, and we're excited to invest into the local area in the long term, providing a significant economic investment, which will provide a range of benefits to the local community. We are pleased with the officer's recommendation to approve the proposal, and we trust that you can now support the application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. Councillor Austin, it's now your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have called in this application for three main reasons, which are the concerns of Wibberton Parish Council and many others. The three things are litter, additional traffic on West End Road and its need for a cycleway and footpath, and tailbacks on the A52. Firstly, let's consider litter. I'm sure that you will all agree that sure as night follows day, this drive-through restaurant will greatly increase the amount of litter distributed randomly within a 2-mile radius of this site. There is huge public concern about litter from drive-through restaurants. Whenever there is a survey of opinion, of public opinion, whatever the subject, a large proportion of the responses refer to littering and what is the council going to do about it. Those of you who do litter picking will know that drive-through restaurants are a main source of litter and are a desecration to the area. All drive-through restaurants should stamp vehicle registration numbers on the packaging. This would radically improve the problem overnight. Sadly, I expect you will feel that national law does not allow for this condition. However, we all need to consider what needs to be done. This planning committee should send a very strong message to McDonald's restaurant chain, pointing out the great public concern on this issue. Please point out they should take whatever vigorous steps they can to reduce littering habits of some of their customers. Now, secondly, let us consider West End Road. This is a very busy road that is little more than a winding country lane just round the corner from the site. Sadly, there is no footpath or cycleway on the fastest half-mile stretch of it. On an average day, 6,000 vehicles are recorded by official counts. This is increasing as the Quadrant estate moves towards completion. To add to this, more large housing estates are about to be occupied or are in the planning stages, and these residents will be using this road. I would ask the committee also to bear in mind that Lincolnshire County Council has a very strong policy to encourage more cycleways in every part of the county. Wibberton Parish Council has been pressing LCC Highways for a footpath cycleway, but has been constantly told that funding depends on developer contributions. This McDonald's restaurant proposal will clearly increase traffic on this road. It is the main access for 2,000 households in the Wibberton area. I therefore ask this committee to apply a contribution condition to this major application towards a cycleway footpath on West End Road, Wibberton. Thirdly, the last item about tailbacks on the A52. As you all know, this is a major issue with the Queen Street McDonald's in town. I'm pleased to see that this matter has received considerable attention in this report to address the problem. If you consider this is still a major risk, then the application should be refused. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Austin. I shall invite members to ask any questions, and I would just add a reminder that members asking questions, these are questions for Councillor Austin and Mr. Thomas. They're not general points that you may wish to address with Mr. Gildersleeve when we get into the debate. So in order, I have Councillor Noble, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have no questions. I'll address matters that were referred to by Mr. Austin and Mr. Thomas later on. So I have no questions. It was a request to speak. That's all. I see the councillor may have a...
Thank you. And Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask Mr. Thomas. It's touching the point that Councillor Austin brought up, and this is very close to my heart. Firstly, I'm walking in some very, very pretty places. Witham Country Park, the Willoughby Road, past the windmill and out into the country, and also the RSPB site leading on to Frampton Marsh. All these three areas, I've seen McDonald's papers and wrappings abandoned. And I do take your point that you are trying to educate your customers. Some, that when the cup is so full, they can't take any more in. They need to empty the cup to be able to absorb the education. Going back to what Councillor Austin said, and looking at the paperwork we've got in front of us, on page 51, item 7.74, third bullet point down, takeaway containers being made of biodegradable fabric materials, and takeaway containers being stamped with registration numbers to enable those responsible of littering to be traced. That's my bugbear. Is this something that we can put forward to McDonald's? Is this something that McDonald's already do? What's your stance on this, Mr. Thomas, please?
My personal stance actually sits the same as McDonald's. I agree with you. I don't condone littering in any way, shape or form, nor does McDonald's. We don't like it. It is a criminal offence. We give customers as much opportunity as possible to dispose of their packaging correctly and properly, and we will continue to explore this. It is a point that we are passionate about, hence why we do and have launched campaigns where we're trying to help with the education side of it, and we'll continue to do more and more with this. We have had conversations of, and I've seen suggestions historically on number plates on receipts. There is question marks over GDPR that go with that. There are problems in terms of proving it. Rubbish could be disposed of responsibly with a number plate on there, but if wind blows it out, if for any reason that litter then escapes from bins, it's a very difficult, and having discussed this at great depth, it's very difficult to then prosecute. Anyway,
so Mr. Thomas, let me stop you. The areas I've mentioned are beauty spots. There's no bins, and one should take their rubbish home. But especially Willoughby Road, where people are driving down, probably got their McDonald's in their hand and a coffee.
Can I just come in? I'm very keen that we stick to planning matters, and I don't want us to spend an unnecessary amount of time talking
Right,
about
then-
things
then
that
I
are,
will
that
just
are
finish
not, that we
then.
cannot control as a planning committee.
Mr. Thomas, will you take forward the request from Bottom Borough Council and the environmental portfolio holder, which is myself, about asking for printing on the labels? Would you do that for me, please?
We've had discussions on this historically.
So is that a no? Is that a no, or will you ask? Will you do that again?
I don't think this is not the place to pick up this conversation. I really do think we need to keep on matters of planning. Matters of environmental policy can be picked up outside of this meeting through those channels. I'll go on to Councillor Watson, please, if you've got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question is to Councillor Richard Austin. Just really, Richard, if I may, I understand, and I did raise this matter with, and I'm talking now about the Queen Street store and the queuing of traffic that then snarls up the next roundabout, which is the Liquor Pond Street roundabout. And there are two main things that I've previously noticed, and this is as a driving instructor. Trains at the crossing cause delays, and I suggest that because there is a nearby crossing close to this location, that will occur again, and that will be unavoidable. But the Queen Street store, I understand, has had or has somehow organised the queuing to be in the car park. In fact, much like this application has, and I commend that plan with the car park plan to ensure that the traffic then does not queue up, and then essentially in this case could possibly block the A52, which is a major road. So as I say, with respect to Councillor Austin, I think the Queen Street queuing issues, I suggest, are quite possibly resolved now. Thank you.
Councillor Austin, would you like to answer that?
Well, I noted the detail that this matter of queuing and tailbacks had been considered in the report, and I personally think it probably will have been resolved, but it's obviously up to the planning committee members to come to their own conclusions on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Austin. Councillor Noble. You're muted, Councillor Noble.
We're blame the sunlight, Chairman. Yes, I have no question. I've seen the questions are finished, so I'm going to proceed to speak on substantive issues.
Hold on, not yet. We'll come to that in a moment. Thank you. I was just about to say thank you to our speakers. I don't see anyone else indicating to ask you a question. So I'll say thank you very much, and if you could, if Jeanette, you would be so kind to put Mr. Thomas and Councillor Austin into the waiting room. If you wish to follow the rest of the meeting, then you're able to do that on YouTube. So I'll say thank you very much and for your time and contribution with us this morning, and then we'll move on to the main debate. Is that okay, Jeanette?
Yes, I'll move them to the waiting room now, Chairman.
Thank you. And I have Mr. Gildersleeve who's got his hand up, and then we'll come to Councillor Noble, who was certainly first out of the traps to put his hand up as the members. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to come in and give a bit of guidance on a couple of points that that came up with the speakers. The first one I'm going to take is the issue of the cycleway and pedestrian footway on West End Road, which Councillor Austin referred to. And if I can just reshare my screen. So members will be familiar with the area. There is a footway on West End Road, to roughly the point of the cursor here. After that, there is then a section without a footway. Members will be fully aware of the tests regarding planning obligations, particularly when we're seeking contributions, etc., and that they must be directly related to the impact of the development that is proposed. And then there are other tests which we won't necessarily get into, but I would say there are 2 points really. One, we couldn't make an argument, I believe, that this development here and a footway over here are directly related in those terms, given the separation distances between the two, given the nature of the use that we've got here. The second point is I would draw your attention to page 43 of the report, where Highways have actually considered this particular point under 7.42, the top bullet point, which says the development would be acceptable in planning terms without the provision of a cycleway footway along West End Road. So again, that comes back to my point around, is that necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms? Well, clearly there's a Highways position that says it's not. And my final point about that is I completely support the aspiration for a cycleway, footway along there. The question mark around it will be when we look at Q2, that is the opportunity to look at that as a solution. But in terms of the direct link to this development, I don't think that is something that can be justified in this case. The final bit I would just like to reaffirm, I completely hear everything that Councillor Stevens has said in terms of litter, and but we are going way beyond planning and the planning remit. We are here as the planning committee to determine the land use that is before us. There are other statutory regimes, the Environmental Protection Act, it's a criminal offence ultimately to litter, that take precedence. So we have to make our decisions based on planning policy, planning law, and should accept that those other regimes function appropriately. That's not to say that the council, with its many other hats, might seek to work with any form of takeaway provider to address litter, etc. But that's a separate environmental policy for elsewhere in the council. We can only deal with planning matters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gildersleeve. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Gildersleeve for a very comprehensive report. I thought he covered all aspects of the proposal very adequately. For me, the two key criteria are economic benefits of this proposed application and the fact this is a sustainable form of development. But before that, just addressing a point made by Mr. Thomas, the applicant, and Councillor Austin, litter. We know littering is an English disease, if not a British disease. But Mr. Thomas did make very clear in his presentation that they have recycling bins on site, that they have daily litter patrols. I think he said they even had 3 litter patrols per day on their existing McDonald's site. So they seem to be doing their level best to address that problem. They can't be responsible for what their customers do once they leave the precincts of their particular property. Okay, let's talk about the economic benefits. 65 full-time or part-time jobs. Now we know house building goes on apace in Boston. These people need to work, and this will be an excellent opportunity to provide employment for residents new to the area. Parking, there seems to be adequate spaces with 48. The issue of queuing seems to be solved because, according to what was said earlier, there are going to be 22 vehicles able to queue within the site, another 5 on the access road, so there shouldn't be any queuing problems, as there have been at the Queen Street site. So one could argue that McDonald's opening this second site here would ease the congestion that we've had previously on Queen Street. And now, although it's in open countryside, there's no rural character to this area. It's very much of mixed uses. We know there's heavy retail and commercial development in the area. I think the SELT policy 1 is satisfied in terms of the second test of sustainable development. We see that on page 35. The lighting in the site seems to be adequately addressed. And I thought the design of the building is quite appropriate. I mean, we learned, I think it's not particularly high, it's 5.83 meters. They're using a kind of a subtle palette of colours. I think they talked about timber and stone effect and grey cladding. There's going to be a play area. They seem to have addressed the issue of appearance in terms of the design of the site, and there's going to be boundary planting. So I just think the whole thing is a really excellent site. It's an entirely appropriate site. So when everybody's had their say, I would move that we support this application, but mainly I'm focusing on the economic benefits, the number of jobs. I think it's going to be an excellent site for Boston. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. I'll accept that as you moving the paper in line with recommendation. Councillor Skinner.
That's better. We've got some noise on there. Thank you very much, Chairman. I completely support what Jonathan's just said. I find the litter element to McDonald's extremely annoying. I mean, where we are, we're probably 3 miles away from the current one, and yet we constantly find litter out in the countryside, which I would suggest is not an appropriate place to put it. But quite acceptably, the applicant has said, you know, there's a level of social responsibility for all in this. On the other hand, I see an excellent, well thought out application. I know that McDonald's do their utmost within their policies to be environmentally friendly. They're excellent employers from the point of view of young people. We have a big gap for employment for our young people at the moment. So therefore, based on the fact that it's a thorough report, based on the fact the site seems well thought out, and all the people like Highways, etc., seem completely happy, I'm quite happy to second Jonathan's proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. I would concur that this is an incredibly detailed and thorough report, and an awful lot of work has gone in to preparing the application and also in preparing the report that we've got before us. I would add my views just on you know, I appreciate that the concerns about litter are entirely genuine, and Councillor Stevens is absolutely right to be as passionate as she is on this subject. I have every confidence that the comments and discussions of this meeting she'll be able to take forward in the other offices that she holds with that same vigour and passion, and will pursue these matters in that forum. However, I'm genuinely mindful that we, much as though I would love to whack a load of conditions on this application, that would include severe penalties to anyone casting a McDonald's packet out of their window. Unfortunately, we can't apply it in the way that we would all, I'm sure, like. But I won't go on. I think we've had a good presentation, and I echo the point that's been made that it's a good application. It has my support. Councillor Austin, and then I really don't want us to spend too long saying the same things. If we appreciating the hour and how long we've been going, and we've got stuff to get through, I'll go to Councillor Austin, and then I'd like to go to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very quick. I don't think there's any planning reasons to refuse this. There is economic benefit, and it is an acceptable use of this fourth arm of the roundabout without totally shutting the door on the possibility of a distributor road coming through there. So that's all I will say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. I'll hand over to Jeanette. If you could do the roll call on the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's been proposed and seconded that planning permission be granted as recommended by the planning officers. If members could indicate whether they are for, against, or wish to abstain. Yourself, Chairman.
I am for.
Councillor Austin, Alison Austin.
For.
Councillor Bedford.
For.
Councillor Goodale,
For.
Councillor Hasty,
For.
Councillor Noble,
For.
Councillor Pickett,
For.
Councillor Skinner,
For.
Councillor Stevens,
Abstain.
Councillor Trafford,
For.
Councillor Watson,
For.
Councillor Wellborn.
For.
That's clearly carried, Chairman. 11 votes and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much, Jeanette, and thank you, members, for your engagement on that item. We will move on to the, we have the next 3 applications are application for advertising consent for the installation of a range of signs, etc., on the same site. Their application numbers B200427, 0428 and 0429. The reports start on page 59 of the agenda pack, and we will take all 3 of these together, and Mr. Gildersleeve will present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you quite aptly summed up, we're going to take them all together, so I will whistle through them. In short terms, we've got an application for the totem sign on its own. We've then got an application for the illuminated or principal illuminated signage. And then we've got another application for various other forms of signage, principally within the external areas of the car park, etc. Common issues is under the advert regs. So there are only 2 issues we consider: the impact on amenity and the impact on public safety. Public safety is defined as looking at highway safety, pedestrian safety and CCTV. You will see that for all of the applications, there are no objections from any of the relevant bodies in respect of those. So we can consider that that is deemed acceptable for all of the applications. So therefore we have the remaining issue of the impact on amenity to consider for the 3. Various forms of signage in the locality, as members will be aware, some illuminated, some not, some good quality, some not, some totem signs, some tall signs, some signage on buildings. There is an array. So this isn't an area where we're looking to introduce a wholly new form of advertising. The totem sign itself, it's a 12-metre high sign, freestanding, located at the front of the site, identified by the cursor. Identified by the star and the cursor, internally illuminated. That is that sign. The signage on the building is your typical McDonald's branding along the collection points, the pay points, the eaves and fascias of the building, the big golden arches M, all again internally illuminated. And that is how they would look and be positioned around the store itself. And then finally, it's for an array of signage within the wider site. So you can see the various markers where we've got different signs, dot signs throughout. There is some around the play equipment. This is a summary of what we've got. So some is branded in terms of locational, some are safety signs, some are directional in terms of parking. There's your litter sign, Councillor Stevens, in terms of advising others where to put their rubbish, and then the playland signs. The small illuminated menu boards, members will be familiar with them, very distinctive, but again, very discreet and within the site. So in general terms, we are comfortable with the level of signage that is proposed. It is commensurate for the building. And in terms of the amenity of the area is not a problem from the local planning authority's perspective. So the recommendation is to grant advertisement consent for all 3 applications. If we did want to, if members were particularly concerned with one of the particular applications, we'd have to debate that separately and take a separate recommendation. But the recommendation for all 3 is for approval, and they are subject to standard advertisement consent conditions. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gildersleeve. I mean, quite simply, these, to my mind, appear to be pretty standard McDonald's advertising signs in a location which again is pretty it's pretty standard fare, and I would be quite happy to move from the chair approval on all three of those applications. And I see Councillor Austin, you've got your hand up, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I would have made that proposal, so I'm quite happy to second the issues I think have been discussed, impact basically on the surrounding area, which could be light visual intrusion or a potential distraction to traffic. I think none of these are applicable, so I'm very happy to second this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. I see no one else indicating to speak, and I'm happy to move to the vote. If Jeanette, you'd be so kind as to take the roll call.
Thank you, Chairman. So that is a proposal to grant advertisement consent on all three applications, and that's been seconded. If members could indicate whether they are for, against, or wish to abstain. Yourself, Chair.
For.
Councillor Austin.
For.
Councillor Bedford.
For.
Councillor Goodale.
For.
Councillor Hasty.
For.
Councillor Noble.
For.
Councillor Pickett.
For.
Councillor Skinner.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
Abstain.
Councillor Trafford.
For.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Wellborn.
For.
That's carried, Chairman. 11 votes for and 1 abstention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. The final item of business today is the infrastructure funding statement on page 89 of the agenda pack, and Mr. Gildersleeve will present his report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a lot to add on this one, other than to say it's before the committee just for noting more than anything else. I previously did a report not long after I started at the authority about this being a new duty that we had to meet as of December last year. I can confirm to members that we met that duty in terms of producing the required report, and the feedback we've had from MHCLG has been good in terms of the quality and content of that report. So I'd like to pass my thanks to our Section 106 officer, Elaine Henton, who's been doing a lot of work to get our database up together and to produce that statement. A couple of other things I'd just like to point out. You'll see from the report that there were 11 new agreements last year, which secured 144 affordable housing units and just shy of £100,000 towards education and affordable housing. That's in addition to all the previous agreements that we also had that were still binding and are still being delivered out. We had a number of developments that have put forward affordable housing and the Garfitts Lane multi-use games area and education contributions, which again are set out at 2.5 of the report. And the final bit I'd like to just pick up with members is we have introduced a Section 106 monitoring fee, which is set out in the report and is appended at the end, which again is for new agreements to cover our costs of monitoring those agreements moving forward. And members will particularly note that what we've actually done is introduced a bit of flexibility and leeway to our affordable housing partners, so that where there are schemes for solely affordable housing, that there are no other contributions, that we allow a dispensation or a discount to those monitoring fees to encourage them to continue to work with us and deliver much needed affordable housing for the borough. So that is the extent of the report. It is there for information for members. Have a read at your leisure, and I'm happy to take any questions, should there be any.
Very much, Mr. Gildersleeve. I have Councillor Noble, then Councillor Skinner.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, first of all, it's pleasing to read that the number of affordable housing that we're delivering is continuing. I noticed the figure of 63 on page 100. I have a question for Mr. Gildersleeve. It's to do with page 103. It's to do with the delivery road and distributed road, I'm sorry. And what's interesting is the work for that began in 2015. Now, according to this, works will be completed in this year. Why has it taken so long to make the connection from that road, from the A16 to the London road? It seems and a really long time, given that so much housing is already going up in the quadrant development. So, Mr. Gildas, could you explain why it's taken so long to make that connection?
I can't, to be honest with you. Ultimately, it's a matter at the moment between the developer and LCC in terms of when they open that road up and the formal adoption kicks in. So it would be a matter between those two parties. It has planning permission. All the funding that was delivered through the HIF, etc., is in place, and the works have been substantially completed as far as I've seen when I've walked past the site. I would presume it will be to do with the adoption agreements, but that is a matter for the developer. If you felt necessary, Councillor Noble, I'm quite happy to pick it up with Chestnuts and get an identified timescale of when it will be open.
Oh, that would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Gilson.
Yep, I'll pick that up.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Skinner, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I really welcome this solid piece of work. Lots of good things in there. I will agree with Jonathan. It would be nice to have a word with Chestnut to see, you know, I do hate having things that aren't used. So we have an eye, unless that's to stop it from getting worn, of course, but I don't think that. But this is a solid piece of work. Thanks to Elaine, thanks to your other officers, and thank you, Mike. I've noted it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. Yes, and I'll just add my comments to say that it's really good to see this being delivered, both affordable housing and the other money that the schemes are 106 agreements are bringing in. And it's also really good to see that we have the 106 monitoring fee, because it doesn't seem to make an awful lot of sense that we end up bearing the cost of administering this. So it seemed to make an awful lot of sense to me. Thank you, Mike, for bringing that to us and answering questions. I'll agree with Councillor Skinner that we may consider this item noted. And that concludes the business of the meeting. And our next scheduled meeting is due to take place on the 6th of April. And I would just add that it has been good to see everyone again, and good to have some really useful debates and interesting debates and different views around the room. And I look forward to seeing you in our next meeting. And hopefully, hopefully we can see on the horizon the time when we will be able to gather in the municipal building once again. So thank you all for your contributions today, and have a safe journey if you're going anywhere, and keep yourself safe, and we will enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you, Chair. Bye.
I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chairman.